Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This live conversation is When Systems Fail, Stillbirth, Law, Incarceration, and Reproductive Justice. I am here tonight with my fellow PUSH co-founder, Anna Lepevic, and two incredible guests who are experts in policy and lived experience, who are going to share with us about the intersection between our legal system, the law, preventable stillbirths, and also incarceration during pregnancy. And so I'm going to bring on our guests here. We'd love for you to meet Jill Lens, who is a PUSH board member and also a law professor and author of the recent book, Stillbirth and the Law. More about that coming up. And also, we are incredibly lucky to have with us here today Kristie Puckett, who is a gender justice and policy expert. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, Anna, to get things going as you facilitate. I will be in the background here. For anybody watching, we would love for you to ask questions. The comments are open. We are monitoring them. This will be recorded and available to watch later. And please share this because this is going to be really critical information, and we want to make sure that we get it out to as many people as possible. All right. Well, thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Sam. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Lepevic. As she mentioned, I'm one of the co-directors. I'm actually communications director currently and one of the founding members of PUSH, also a bereaved mother of my son, Owen, who was born still in 2015. And I work really heavily in this area of data, information, law, because it's so important for prevention. So thank you, ladies, for being here for today, for this conversation. I actually have your other paper that you used my story for introduction in this. Jill, thank you for including that. It's really important for, I think, most of us who experience such a tragedy to know that there is going to be change after the loss, that our babies didn't die in vain. So thank you for doing that and honoring Caleb as well with your work. So I just want to give you guys a brief moment to introduce yourself so we can get to this really great conversation that we're going to have today. So would you like to go first, Jill, since I just mentioned you again?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. And thank you for letting me share your son with the world. I'll go quickly here. I'm Jill Lens. What brought me to this work, like Anna mentioned, my son Caleb brought me to this work. He was stillborn. I was 37 weeks pregnant, and he was stillborn in 2017, and he should be starting third grade next week with the rest of my kiddos. At the same time, I was a law professor. I am a law professor, and I got back to work, and it was like, I was starting to think about everything I just went through, but from a legal perspective. And at first I was worried that there really wasn't much law to talk about. And then I was like, oh, wait, there's a lot of law to talk about. So since his death, that is what I've been focusing on, how stillbirth and pregnancy loss more generally, how different areas of law touch that.
Thank you, Jill. And I agree. When I lost Owen, I was kind of immediately like, what can I find out? Where's the research? Why did he die? There is such a limitation in what's out there. So it's really important that you continue to honor Caleb in your work that you're doing and, keep pushing for more to be done and spoken about. Kristie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. And again, thank you all for having me. My name is Kristie Puckett, and I came to this work through lived experience. I was pregnant while incarcerated, struggling with substance use, a survivor of a violent relationship, and trying to navigate many systems that treated me as a problem rather than a person. And so my pregnancy was not met with care or respect. It was met with punishment and neglect. And so that experience and the loss of safety and humanity that I felt during such a vulnerable time has really shaped my commitment to advocating for policies that protect pregnant people, especially those who are poor, who are Black, who are more marginalized, who are locked in cages and oftentimes forgotten about by larger society.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. That's horrible that you went through that. And I know that this conversation is going to be really helpful for a lot of people who may misunderstand what it means to be incarcerated and be pregnant and go through all that there and the treatment that you received, which is unacceptable. So I just want to start actually reading something out of here because I was rereading before this interview, and I just love how you started this. So I think it's a really good precursor to the conversation. And so what you said at the beginning was stillbirth, pregnancy losses after 20 weeks of pregnancy, but before birth, are interfering with the right to have and parent a child, a centerpiece of the reproductive justice movement. So I'll just stop there, but I've never heard it said that way, Jill, like the interfering with, our rights to have babies if we choose to. Can you start us off just kind of going over, why you think this is a reproductive justice issue?
Well, and I will default to Kristie for some of this too, but reproductive justice is a more holistic movement, a more holistic framework that thinks about, so for so long in this country, it was such a focus on the right to not have a child, right? And actually, we're still very much within that. But reproductive justice, rightly reacted in the sense that it's more than just the right to not have a child. It's also the right to have a child. And that emphasis especially came from women of color who had historically, their right to have a child had been interfered with, much more so. And to me, if you think about the right to have a child and like how are people being deprived of that? Well, sterilization comes up, of course, but what else is interfering with people who want to have a child? And it's pregnancy loss, right? And we don't think about pregnancy loss in the same way as like as horrible, like forced sterilization, right? But in the same way, pregnancy loss is some people wanted that child and they didn't get to have that child. And maybe because it was, maybe it was because of horrific conditions. Maybe it was just because there's really no efforts to prevent stillbirth in this country, despite at least a quarter being preventable. Mm-hmm. So I just think that when we talk about the right to have a child, that is also the right to make sure someone has the tools they need to have a healthy pregnancy. And sorry, the one thing I will add too is it's such an important aspect from the reproductive justice movement to also think about things that are disproportionately happening to women of color, and stillbirth is right up there.
Mm-hmm. And along with that too, in your book, a new one, Stillbirth the Law, you explore how legal and policy framework impact the prevalence of stillbirth. Can you share one or two examples where the law has either failed to protect parents or actually worse, contributed to the preventable loss?
Yeah, I will just briefly, there's two chapters in there about tort law, which is like personal injury law, right? And unfortunately, how many times have we heard stories from stillbirth moms about like, well, I said this to the doctor and they didn't listen, or worse, like the doctor affirmatively did something I didn't want. And the lawyer in me starts to think about medical malpractice. And unfortunately, tort law is really set up that it's very deferential to sort of what our standard of care is, like what doctors traditionally do. And that's not very helpful then when you're trying to sue your doctor because they didn't prevent a stillbirth. You think they could have prevented your kid's stillbirth. But what they did was just do the normal standard of care, which unfortunately doesn't emphasize stillbirth prevention in this country. So that's something I talk about. Another thing I'll just briefly bring up too is how we treat what we do with fetal autopsies in this country. And actually it's what we don't do with fetal, because we don't do them really very much in this country. Oftentimes the only time fetal autopsy is emphasized is when we want to arrest someone, right? Then all of a sudden an autopsy was done. It was like, wait, but we don't do these systematically to help figure out what is causing stillbirth. And I think about the SIDS movement a lot and how state laws started, making fetal autopsies routine. So I think about that a lot. That's another thing I talk about in my book too.
Yeah, that really struck me as well, because I know in my case, I could not get answers. Like I was digging for answers. There was literally the response was sometimes healthy babies just die. We don't know what happened, go ahead and get pregnant again and we'll take better care of you next time kind of thing, So it's really shocking when there's an idea that there might have been, whatever reason, someone blaming someone in the hospital, thinking that this person looks suspicious for whatever racism, I don't know, all the things, right? That then they start to say, oh, well, we need to figure out why this baby died. Like, why didn't they do that for me? I actually wanted it. You know, that's where I really get pissed off. I mean, first of all, the racism isn't acceptable. Second of all, me, a parent who deserves answers, could not get them. You know, for 5 years, it took me to figure things out. So that is just, yeah, very bothersome. It's not protocol, right? It should be. And I think another part that you touch on with that too is the surveillance piece, and how sometimes people fear that that could be used against parents. And on the other side of this, you know, we do want data. We need the data. We need to use that to improve, you know, care. So can you just explain to the viewers here why it shouldn't actually make it where you can use this against the parents?
I mean, it's just so difficult, right? It's so difficult. But I mean, the emphasis of autopsies should be about research and prevention. And that's why I get so frustrated when you read a news article about some already probably traumatized woman who just lost her baby, and now all of a sudden they did an autopsy, and it was like, wait, since when do we do autopsies on an 18-week miscarriage? That is not a routine thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just like adding to the trauma of like, oh, in your case, we're going to do it. And you already mentioned, very often those arrests, I mean, not more than very often, overwhelmingly, those arrests and suspicion is for marginalized women. And we're just adding to the trauma then of everything that has just happened. And I don't have a quick and easy answer for that on it. It's just, you know, it's I feel like if they were more routine and less sort of, they shouldn't just be routine when we want to blame the person.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When we're trying to figure out whether we can arrest the person.
And Kristie, do you have any experience with stories like these? Did you hear other women that were incarcerated share, you know, that they might have either been arrested because of a pregnancy loss or because they were suspected of having caused it? I know right now we're reading a lot of stories, you know, people are going after women who have miscarriages even, you know, and thinking that they somehow caused this, and they want to put them in jail now for 15 years, you know, for a pregnancy loss, which we know women can't control.
I mean, yeah, I think this is to be expected when you are, when we live in a country where we don't have bodily autonomy, when we allow the restriction of a person's rights around what happens to their body, it leaves us open to a lot of injustices. And so, yeah, I think we'll see a lot more stories of people having their pregnancies and the outcomes of those pregnancies criminalized. And Black and brown women have experienced, and, you know, drug users have experienced these criminalized outcomes for decades. I think it will be more widespread now. And I think that, as we have stated in the past, that all people with uteruses need to be concerned about the level of interest of people who don't have uteruses in them, because most people who don't have a uterus can't tell you how they work, how they function, what they're for, what they do, and are creeped out by just very normal, healthy conversations. I speak to prison officials all the time about the need for menstrual equity, and I can't tell you how they don't want me to talk about bleeding. And it's like, well, you arrest women who bleed. I'm sorry, you didn't think that people were gonna bleed who you arrested? Like, it's right. And so, yes, I think that we will continue to see a lack of understanding, and we'll see a lack of understanding most reflected in the policies and the way that law enforcement will be weaponized, and social workers will be deputized to monitor things that they haven't had to monitor in the past. You know, I think watching a woman in Georgia be kept alive, just to see what would happen to a baby, you know, so the rights of a fetus have long been pit against the rights of the mother. And so I think we see that play out in many different ways. And the outcomes are, you know, sometimes tragic. Everybody does not have a good outcome when we begin to, again, restrict people's bodily autonomy.
Mm-hmm. That's so important. Actually, that just brings to mind too, like the fact that you're saying that right now. I'm thinking about what do you think all people should know about this, because I feel like maybe some people think like this doesn't apply to me. Like this is very niche. Either if you've had a stillbirth, or you might have.
No, stillbirth. Number one, I want to say it's probably often invisible because our society as a whole struggles to deal with like grief and loss, and especially when it doesn't fit the narrative of like healthy baby, healthy mama. And so when you layer incarceration or maybe addiction on top of that, then you hear the silence become even louder.
Right.
So when stillbirths that happen to women that are incarcerated, those are hidden or even dismissed as if our losses don't count because we're criminalized. So when we center stillbirth in this larger reproductive justice context, it means that we are affirming every pregnancy loss and saying that every pregnancy loss matters, and that systems have a duty to protect all pregnant people, including those who are incarcerated or struggling with substance use disorder. And so if we can ensure that those who are struggling the most vulnerable to adverse birth outcomes, if we can ensure that those folks are having good, healthy birth outcomes, then that means that we can assume that all people will begin to have some of those healthy birth outcomes, right? And so I just think that we just have to make sure that everybody who wants to have a baby, to Jill's point earlier, is able to do so, and able to even question if they don't have a healthy outcome, question the outcome without themselves being looked at as a culprit, or just even having their questioning being questioned or queried. I mean, who would not want to know why they had a healthy pregnancy up until this day, and then a doctor just say, well, babies just die sometimes. Like, what? So number one, it doesn't even affirm how great the loss is. We don't really have a word for it in our language of what it means to be a parent that has lost a child. What do you call yourselves, right? There's not one word that captures the grief that you have experienced, because it is so profound. And so to have someone treat it so cavalierly, I think, is also just a testament to having folks in positions of power and people who make decisions over our bodies that don't really understand the impact of their decisions.
Mm-hmm. Jill, did you have anything to add to that? I saw you nodding, and I'm thinking like you actually wrote stuff similar to this. So like, it's great that we brought you both together, because you're looking at it from your perspective too.
I mean, I disagree with everything Kristie said. Can I just say that? I mean, the only thing I was thinking too is, you started with the idea that like, we don't want to talk about grief. We don't want to talk about the bad things. Right. And whatever, I get it. But I think that also feeds into blame too, because it's
that was the part I wanted you to talk about.
I want to think that this could never happen to me, right? Like, oh my gosh, that's so horrible. Your baby died like as you were giving birth or something, So I want to comfort myself in thinking that will never happen to me. And the way we do that is assuming that the person that it happened to did something. Mm-hmm. And then you put those assumptions in with like biases. And it's not surprising how we got here.
Right. And I see this with the advocacy work we do at PUSH. We go into meetings with the legislators and we try to explain what stillbirth is and what causes stillbirth. And we show our stories, we share our babies' pictures. And then some of them even tell us like, oh, I thought it just happened to people who do drugs, or, they smoke, because there is some research on this, right? But there's not a lot of everything else that causes stillbirth. Like my baby died of cord compressions, and the cord wasn't looked at for so long. So placenta is a major cause too. Those are all things out of a woman's control. But of course, we don't talk about that. We don't need to go into the fact that the system failed us, that they didn't actually provide good enough care, and they were not checking on the two vital organs and structures that keep your baby alive, right?
It's just it's very lazy. Like it's a lazy, it's a crappy prevention measure, regardless, to like criminalize, obviously, but it's a very lazy, right? It's like, we don't want to do any actual research. Let's just blame the drug use. Mm-hmm. Like, you haven't done the research. So you yeah.
So I want to move us along real quick to more of Kristie's story, because I know you are open about sharing about what it's like to be incarcerated and pregnant. What do you see in that as like, maybe obviously there's going to be more risk factors being pregnant in the system, and like what level of care is received? I'm sure it's much worse than what you would get, obviously, a private practice or anything like that. But I'm just very curious, who even comes in to see you, or is there someone in house? Like, how does that all work? And how did you feel as far as being a birthing person?
Yeah, so there's a distinction I want to make at the beginning between there's jails where people are being held pretrial who are legally innocent, and then there are prisons, people who are post-conviction, people who have been sentenced. And so my pregnancy experience was in a jail. So that means I was being held pretrial, I was legally innocent. And I stayed, a really large bond was set, over $160,000 was set. And I was in a drug bust, essentially. That's the only way I can describe it, is easily without taking up all the time. I was in a drug bust. They set my bond at $160,000. I tell the folks, hey, I'm pregnant. They're like, okay. And they put me in a cell, and I never really leave that pot again. I'm taken to court, but I'm never taken to see a doctor in an outside medical facility. So they did have a nurse that worked at the facility. She would, I would go to medical to get weighed, and they weighed me each week to see if I was gaining a large amount of weight, because then that would indicate they might need to prick my finger to check for gestational diabetes. But other than that, she would check for like a fetal heartbeat, and that was it. I would go back upstairs. I had extra apple, extra milk, things like that, but nothing really significant. I had no prenatal vitamins. Again, I'm supposed to go to medical clinic out in the community, but never went. Each jail is different. I live in North Carolina. We have 100 counties. So there's 100 different jails. And that means that the level of care that a person can receive based on the county and its budget, where it's located, the ruralness of it, can impact a person's care. Here in North Carolina, we have over 55 prisons. Some of them house women, but only one of the prisons houses pregnant women. And those folks, fortunately, get to see a doctor that I'm very good friends with, who you all might know, Dr. Andrea Knittel. She works at UNC Chapel Hill, and she's able to see the pregnant folks over there. So they are here in North Carolina receiving good quality care at the prison level. But the most significant risk factors that I would name are timely medical care. We have many studies and reports, not studies, but excuse me, many anecdotal reports from women who have been inside, and even news reports that show that there are women who ask for medical and never receive it, and have their baby inside of a cell by themselves. Oftentimes those babies are born alive, but die due to the lack of medical care immediately after. I would say fragmented prenatal care. Not seeing the same person each time, and then when you do get out, you may be back in the community, and you're not able to have continuity of care. And even in my case, neglect, not receiving any care. Even basic things like consistent access to nutritious food. The food inside of jails and prisons is not nutritious. You can be delayed or denied any medications. And when you're incarcerated, you don't have any control over your. You can't choose your provider. You can't refuse harmful practices. You don't get to say what hospital you need to go to. You don't even get to go to a hospital when something feels wrong. So you don't get to go to the doctor and say, hey, I need to go see my doctor this week. If you're bleeding or in pain, you wait until an officer decides to call medicals. And that waiting has cost lives. And we know that waiting costs lives. So layered on top of that stigma, pregnant people in prisons and jails can be seen as undeserving or unfit mothers just because they are there, regardless of the basis or the nature of their charges. And that mindset justifies the harmful neglect and increases the risk of miscarriage, stillborn, and the long-term trauma that these mamas carry. So again, even basic things like prenatal vitamins, rest, healthy food aren't consistent. And there's even the constant stress of being criminalized, right, while carrying a child. What's going to happen to my baby? Most people who are pregnant are at risk of being shackled to the bed while pregnant. We were able to ban that in several states and in North Carolina in the federal system, but there are several states that still allow pregnant people to be shackled while laboring. You have an officer in the room with you while you are there. This is not somebody that you know. Oftentimes it's a male officer. What's the need for the male? Who's running away while they are laboring and delivering? Nobody. You're trying to deliver a healthy baby. And then lots of states have it where it's 24 mothers get 24 hours to bond with the baby, and then the baby is placed with a family member, or if not with a family member, then the state takes custody and the baby is placed into foster care. So there are a lot of pain points when you talk about pregnancy inside of these carceral spaces, family separation. I've talked to mothers even about the postpartum. What is it like to be chained to the bed, to have your baby placed with some strangers or with family members, and you don't get to really bond, kiss, breastfeed. You go to a prison, to a cell, and you don't get the proper nutrition, the proper rest. Oftentimes you don't have the proper sanitary that you need as your body is healing. So yeah, it's pretty bad inside of prisons and jails for women who are pregnant and or lactating.
Right.
And for incarcerated women, I'll just add, stillbirth isn't just a tragedy, right? And just like for most women, it's preventable. And it's sometimes, and most of the times, it's a direct result of neglect and the systemic indifference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, just listening to you, I can hear multiple times where I'm like, oh God, that woman just got put more at risk, more at risk. You know, every time you spoke one more thing, I'm like, we all know like inconsistency of care is actually a leading cause of stillbirth. Now I know, I didn't know back then when I was using HMO and I saw different doctors, you know, but we have seen in research that seeing the same doctor is so important so that they can follow along with the pregnancy and really get that relationship building too as well, so the mother can open up if she feels anything's wrong or different, and you know they can catch something in time. So yeah, that's very terrible that there's so many factors. Jill, do you know, as far as like the law side of that, is there any protections for these women while incarcerated, or they just kind of like lost all their rights because they're in, or maybe Kristie, this is more your question, but either one of you, do they feel like the prison system, I know some of it is for profit, some of it is run by the state, I don't know, it's all different, but do they think that these women just don't have rights, or that they don't have the, you know, healthcare is a human right, I would assume it's still their rights, but how do they get treated in there?
I mean, I would say that, you know, the prison conditions in general aren't humane for any human being. So when you take it down to pregnant people, then it's especially dangerous. And then when you add in women and girls are just ad hoc, right? Like the prisons were not designed with women and girls in mind. So we're just there. So the facilities aren't even equipped to have a woman or a girl. They didn't even have clothes for me. They didn't have maternity clothes. So they gave me really big men's clothes. Okay. So you're giving me really big men's clothes with these slick floors, with these slick shower shoes, shackling me. That puts me at risk for falling forward, for, you know, it was, all of it is a decision. And I think that that's why we push for policy change, so that, you know, we don't want to have to go through a long litigation and all of that, because that takes years for change. It would be easier just to work with prison officials, jail officials, to change the policy and make sure that we have policies that really reflect, you know, the need that they have for safety of themselves and their staff and the people who are incarcerated, as well as the health and wealth and needs of the people who are incarcerated. That's a balance that sheriffs and prison officials have to find for all people who are in prison. When we're talking about especially medically vulnerable people, women to show the inherent dangerousness of prisons and jails, oftentimes the response of a pregnant person is to place them in solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement means that you're in a cell the size of a parking space, for 23 and a half hours a day. You're let out for a half hour of rec. You get to shower twice a week. A pregnant person has not done anything. That's a punishment that we use for people who don't follow rules inside the prison. But all a pregnant person has to do is just be pregnant, and they are placed in the same conditions as people who we deem to be incorrigible, right? And so I think when we look at the policies, there are ways that we can push for change without having to have these long, prolonged fights in the courts, which, quite frankly, right now, depending on where you live, you may not be able to trust them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do wonder about accountability for that, because even in my case, you know, can't really get anyone to take the case because, well, I didn't do autopsy because I got talked out of that. And so I didn't have that bit of proof as far as like what exactly was going on internally with my son, even though later I found out it was due to the cord compression. So I wondered, for accountability's sake too, for mothers who lose babies in prison, it's just like nothing. You can't do anything about it.
But general consensus is you shouldn't have been in prison. If you wanted to be a mother, if you wanted to have healthy birth outcomes, or if you wanted to just be not exposed to violence and the violence and trauma of prison, then you shouldn't have went. And so that's the general attitude of not just system actors, but the general public. When we talk about, the atrocities of prison, people's knee-jerk reaction is, well, what did they do? Why are they in prison? As if, the majority of people in prison are there for the heinous crimes that we think of people being in prison for. The people that most people agree should be in prison are the people who are, hurt children, who are sexual predators, and who are serial killers. Those folks represent less than 5% of the prison population. Most of the people who are in prison today are there for drug crimes, property crimes, other things that aren't the three things that we think most people should be in prison for. And so we're subjecting people to these really, again, horrendous, torturous, inhumane conditions based on what we think they deserve, based on behavior.
Mm-hmm. Is there legislation right now that you're trying to promote, or what would it be if you had a chance to start something up that we can all kind of get behind and help you with?
So, well, in South Carolina, Alabama, California, North Carolina this year, there was a act called the CARES Act. And the CARES Act is sought to defer pregnant folks from having their cases adjudicated, which means, sentence, whatever, working through the system, that they wouldn't have to deal with that until at least 3 months to postpartum and up to 12 months postpartum, so that mothers could have their babies, keep that care, not have fragmented care, see doctors in the community, and then still have time to bond with their baby, breastfeed, make arrangements for care, and then they would deal with whatever consequences of their behavior that they would be facing. And so the first step, I would say, to keeping pregnant people safe, if I were to write any legislation, would be to make sure that we're keeping pregnant people out of jails and prisons altogether, because it's not a safe environment for pregnant folks. And where custody does still exist, then we have to have laws mandating full prenatal and postpartum care that is equivalent to the care that folks would receive on the outside if they were to seek that care. We have to ban shackling, ban solitary confinement, and any other punitive practices that put pregnancies at risk. And then create those community-based alternatives and diversion programs, so no one is forced to carry out a pregnancy under the conditions of punishment and neglect.
Thank you. I think that's so important. We should definitely share those links for you when you get a chance to send them to us, if we can help people spread it around their states as well, because it's something that you don't even probably think about, obviously, like on a regular basis, is like, but when you hear it, you're like, of course they should be getting proper care, and nothing should be contributing to loss. If they're even, whatever they did, whatever you think they did wrong, they still deserve proper care. Jill, since you haven't had a chance to chat more lately, I want to bring you back in. Just kind of thinking more about the criminalization aspect of this, and once we know more of the causes. So the problem right now is also we're so limited in our data. And then obviously that affects research, because the data is not clean. Like we're getting the wrong data because they're immediately filling it in, and they're just putting what they think is the cause, and just imagining like, oh, well, this mom did drugs, let's put that, or, this baby had the cord around the neck, let's put that, and so the whole research on stillbirth is pretty messy. But we have 50% that are unexplained as well, because there's just not enough trained pathologists in the country that can go into that deeper and help us find the cause. So I think that, I guess the highlight for me would be if we could do more, if we could get more autopsies, if that was standard and everyone could find a cause, then the research can be done. And then we would be able to point to more like actual causes of losses. And so that then women wouldn't be blamed for something that is most likely out of control, because every doctor I've talked to when we do these kind of interviews and everything in my work, I said it's never the mother's fault. And that's a clear statement there, very comfortable with saying. So what do you also think about all that I just threw at you?
I mean, I love it when they tell us it's not your fault. But at the same time, if they can't explain why it happened, they also can't really tell us that it's not our fault. I mean, I'm walking a tightrope here, a fine line, right? Because I mean, when I talk about fetal autopsies, most people, or a lot of people, especially in the reproductive rights area, are very nervous about autopsies because we would use them to blame pregnant people, especially marginalized pregnant people. And that is true. It is true. Unfortunately, very often autopsies are used for that. But I also think that the lack of autopsies contributes to the blame. And if we had holistically more autopsies, then we'd have more research, and we wouldn't, we'd have more research and we'd have more ability to explain things. I mean, I think about some of the more high profile arrests that have happened after pregnancy loss. And I think about like Chelsea Becker in California, and the guy who did the autopsy never even looked at her records, her health records. Right. And we can't have just like shoddy one-off autopsies when we think we want to blame, we're trying to figure out whether we can blame this person. And I'm just thinking so much of what Kristie was talking about too, about, providing care at least equivalent to what you would get outside the prison. And so much of that is so not even, it's not enough, right? It's not enough. And I'm taking kind of a tangent on it, I apologize, but one thing I discovered in writing the book that I honestly had no idea that this was true. I took a deeper dive into ACOG's guidelines. And there are a couple situations where they say there should be more care, right? Anytime the risk of stillbirth is known to be double. Well, one place we know, we never talk about this, but one place we know where the risk of stillbirth is double is using IVF. And ACOG says, yeah, let's do more surveillance, more care for IVF. And then ACOG also says, oh, you know what? We also know that the risk is double for Black women. But they don't advise additional care for Black women when your doubled risk of stillbirth is because you're a Black woman. And, there's some language in there about thinking about systemic racism and thinking that additional care is not the cure for that. And I mean, agree or disagree, I don't also see the harm of just doing the additional care when the risk is double. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's more, it's just sort of thinking more holistically about a lot of things, about why we're doing certain things the way we are doing them within medical care.
Mm-hmm. I mean, personally, as an advocate, I feel like when I finally knew the cause of the loss, it gave me the opportunity to do more on what I'm doing now, which is trying to prevent it for other people. So I think most parents would want to know, first of all, just for the grief. And like, I did blame myself. I mean, everyone starts to blame themselves if they don't have information, and they start to like, well, what the heck did I do differently or wrong this pregnancy, And I just can imagine how horrible that grief would be if someone's actually blaming you, like the system's coming in and trying to find, what did you do wrong? And you're just like, I did everything, I wanted this baby. Like when you get to the last term, these are not pregnancies that, people just want to lose. You're talking about stillbirth. This is the end of the pregnancy. So I'm just horrified that anyone would have the finger pointed at them, when they need information as well for themselves, for their healing.
I mean, this always really touches a lot of what I think about too, because I share this in the book too. When Caleb was stillborn, I got great medical care, and I think about how important that medical care is for my sanity and my mental health. And I'm also thinking about that within the things that Kristie is talking about. Like if you're already under horrible conditions giving birth, and then if your baby dies, and then what kind of medical care are you getting? Like, it's just horrible. But one of my healthcare providers was trying to tell me that it wasn't my fault, which I honestly hadn't thought yet that it could have been my fault. But she said to me, it's not like you did cocaine or anything. And immediately in my head, I was like, how do you know I didn't do cocaine? And how would you be treating me right now if you thought I did?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I appreciate her comment in the sense that she was trying to reassure me and help me, and we got fantastic medical care. But I mean, it has always stuck with me for obvious reasons.
Yeah. And I think we're in a privileged, unfortunately, situation that they did not assume that we were the ones that did it, right? Can you imagine? Like, I know I was drug tested actually, which is interesting because I didn't know at the time, but I look back at my medical records every few months whenever I have the energy and I can go through it because I was not given information of, why Owen died. So I always dig in every now and then. And with what I learn more, and I can figure things out. And I did see in one of the pages that I was drug tested and never was brought up. No one ever told me you passed the test. We're not going to have to lock you up, lady, but how horrible is that they just instinctively, instead of anything else they could have offered me, they could have done blood testing on Owen, try to see what else. There's other ways to do things to babies. You don't have to autopsy. You can do things that are not invasive. But no, there was no effort in the terms of that, like giving me closure, giving me information that I needed. But they just want to make sure that I didn't cause it, right? I guess.
Yeah, and what about, education beforehand and just reacting properly and helping people who may be addicted while pregnant? They want help. People want help. And instead we just sort of lecture and, say, yeah.
So just to wrap up, because this has been really a hard, heavy topic, and thank you both for sharing and all the research and work you're doing in your worlds. And we're here to support with that. Anytime we can share on our page, please let us know. But what gives you guys hope in this work when especially we're up against really deeply rooted injustice and racism and, systemic issues? Where do you find hope as you guys both try to work on improving this for others?
I derive my hope from the resilience of the women who have survived these systems and are leading the change. I was just down in Savannah, Georgia this weekend with Restore Horror, led by Pam Wynn, which she was pregnant while incarcerated. And the entire conference was about being able to collect data and working with researchers around this very issue of being pregnant while incarcerated to reduce these adverse birth outcomes, stillbirth being one of those outcomes. And so I see hope in the fact that conversations like this one is happening, naming stillbirth, naming incarceration and justice in the same breath, because every time silence is broken, it's my thought that we move closer to justice.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I mean, I have the same answer as Kristie. So it's the people we meet. It's the people we meet and how so many of us are fortunately, like, I guess empowered is the word I want to get, empowered by what we went through. And we want to make sure no one else has to go through it. And part of it is also, I mean, you mentioned privilege before, Anna, like, I know how well, I mean, it was horrible, but I know how well it went for me. So if it's going to happen to other people, I want everyone to have the best possible. I wouldn't want anyone to have this experience, but if it does happen, I want everyone to have the best possible experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've seen cases, and I have Google alerts. So I just sent you one today about a loss where they were blaming the woman for her miscarriage, and she was kind of, I think, probably forced along to say it was her fault because there was drugs involved, but she doesn't know that that was necessarily the cause. And so now she's going to do time for that. And other stories that I've heard in the past too, where they're talking about it like it's a miscarriage, but it was actually a stillbirth. And yet they did not go down the road of like, okay, we need to actually find the cause of the death of the baby and do the autopsy and all these things. Or actually the story that really bothered me was when they told the woman, to miscarry at home. And then they blamed her for not knowing how to properly dispose of the baby, which is like, you told her, we can't help you here, go home. And then I've had miscarriages. I've been told just flush the toilet, but no one's coming to my house with, to arrest me. So like all of this is so bothersome to me. It's horrific to be the person going through the pregnancy loss. And then on top of that, these added fears of, being blamed or incarcerated. And So it's just, I mean, like Samantha said at the beginning, it could happen to any person really, but obviously they're going after particular people, but we can't allow it. And I think that's why speaking out is so important. And thank you both for doing that, because it's brave and it's important that we do this, because we know it wasn't our fault. In our cases, we know, we have certain rights, and as birthing people, we have certain rights and certain care that needs to be given to every person, no matter where they are in the country or the world. So thank you both for this important work. Oh, wrapping up here, I think I want to invite Samantha back up because she's been listening in the background, and I want to just let her give her 2 cents to close us out here. So we're going to bring Sam back up. There she is. Hey, Sam.
Hey guys, oh my God, what an incredible conversation. I'm just so grateful to all three of you for being here and for so courageously shining a light on these issues. I think as you both said, like the only way any of this gets better is if we talk about it. And we need everyone to understand that this is not only an issue that happens in Black communities or only happens to drug users, like especially with the political environment today. The stories that you have heard today, oh, we lost Kristie, could happen literally to anyone. And so it's really critical that we are all aware. Oh, Kristie's back. Here we go. It's really critical that we're all aware that this is happening, that we, are doing what we can as a community and as fellow parents to protect each other and to make sure that we are all empowered with whatever information we have to help advocate for ourselves and for our friends and loved ones. So, thank you guys again so much. I want to encourage everyone watching this to please remember to share. Again, we can't create change unless we're talking about it. So help us get the word out about this. Please follow Kristie and Jill on social media. Oh, I hit the wrong thing, sorry. In order to, keep up on their progress and learn more. And also remember to head over to our blog at pushpregnancy.org /when systems fail for a link to Jill's book, Stillbirth the Law, along with a discount code, and also to lots of incredible resources that were created by Kristie to learn more about the particular challenges and dangers facing pregnant women in the carceral system. Anna, what am I forgetting?
You got it all, sister.
Oh, wait, no, I'm remembering what I forgot.
One more thing.
Please go to pushpregnancy.org and donate.
Why not?
We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are all volunteers. We are all parents who have been touched by the, tragedies of stillbirth and other types of loss and maternal issues. And we need your support in order to keep going. So thank you so much. And again, huge thank you to Kristie and to Jill for being here today to share your expertise. And we're so grateful for everyone who joined us. So united we push.
United we push. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.